Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the greatest recordings ever. And today, we're talking about Bartók's Violin Concertos, particularly number 2, because that's the big one. You know, Bartók's career has been undergoing something of a revaluation in the past few years, at least I think. You know, it's hard to tell, not being able to see the forest for the trees. But, when I was coming up in the world in the 60s and 70s, Bartók was really, really a major, major figure, particularly for his string quartets, which were considered by many to be, the greatest since Beethoven's. I mean, I'm not joking. Nowadays, it seems that saying that would raise a few eyebrows. It really would. I mean, they are amazing works. There's no question about that. They're difficult works, which is one of the things. And maybe that difficulty counts against them now. I'm not sure. But Bartók generally, who was regarded as sort of the acme of a combination of formal discipline and expressive potency and folk/avant-garde aesthetics, he sort of had it all. And nowadays I just don't hear him talked about that much, and I don't see him being recorded as frequently. Even really popular works like the Concerto for Orchestra, and the piano concertos and things like that, they just don't seem to be programmed like they used to be. And there's a lot of really great music. I don't need to tell you, Bartók is fabulous. He really is. But the Violin Concerto number 2, I have to confess. Well, number 1, let's put it that way. Number 1 was written for, who was it? His love at that time. Steffi Geyer was her name, I think, something like that. And it was never performed, I don't think, in Bartók's lifetime, complete, or the way he wrote it. It has 2 movements. And the first movement he excerpted and stuffed into a little work called 2 portraits, one ideal, one grotesque. And the ideal portrait is the first movement of the Violin Concerto. The second movement is a quicker, slightly more folky type thing. The first movement is highly chromatic and perfumed, if you want to call it that, kind of like Szymanowski, that late romantic, totally chromatic sludge fest that a lot of composers were indulging in. And so it wasn't reassembled and performed until after Bartók passed away, and it really only exists on recordings. You almost never see it programmed in concert. The second Violin Concerto, on the other hand, was considered one of the 20th century masterpieces for the violin. It seems to have been supplanted to a certain extent by the Shostakovich first Violin Concerto. Like, there can only be one modern violin concerto in the universe at any one time. And I have to confess, I never particularly cared for the second Violin Concerto because I found it, bony. Maybe that's the word. Kind of, it's very violin-y. And I never much liked all that crazy violin passage work. The violin's just going, all that rustling around it. It has to be lightly accompanied because otherwise you're not going to hear the violin at all. And so it sort of, it just never struck me. It really didn't. And so I have been very late on this channel talking about the Bartók Second Violin Concerto because everybody records it still. At least most major violinists do it. But again, I don't see it programmed with the frequency that it used to be. And that's a shame because it really is a great work. I mean, my taste is irrelevant. It is a masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination. And my favorite recording, or my nomination for one of the best recordings ever, excuse me, is this one. It's Thomas Zehetmair, who's just such a fabulous violinist. He sort of flies under the radar, I think, of some of the great violinists. He doesn't have the flash and dash, and he really doesn't look good in a strapless dress. I guarantee that. And it certainly counts against him. But it's with the Budapest Festival Orchestra and Iván Fischer, who we know are terrific, and especially in this music, and they play it gloriously. This is on Berlin Classics. It's also not on one of your primo labels, but I love the performance. It was made in It looks like 1995. Yes, it was. And it's extremely well engineered. And Zehetmair is a violinist at the German school, which I think is just a very interesting group of folk. They play with somewhat more limited vibrato, and there's a combination of intellectuality and emotion, which I think works really well with Bartok, especially the Second Violin Concerto. So my suggestion is that if you can find this, you give it a listen. And if you have had problems with Bartok's Second Violin Concerto, as I have, this may well be the performance that sets all that right. It worked for me. I can certainly tell you that. But, maybe I was just feeling receptive. But I just think these are splendid performances and very little acclaimed. They deserve vastly more attention than they've received because they really do go right to the core of the work. I mean, it just seems a perfect combination of passion and discipline, which is what you always have in Bartok. You really do. So give it a shot and see what you think. And, we're not going anywhere. You can let me know. Thank you for joining me, friends. Keep on listening. Take care.